Russian assets in the billions could be used to help Ukraine, but talks in Europe show why that plan is not so straightforward. I'm Marco Werman. Today, the latest on that. Plus, a Chinese man seeking asylum in the U.S. could be deported.
So what could happen to him? At minimum, a life imprisonment, torture, and who knows, it could be even death penalty.
Also, 25 years ago, a huge deposit of natural gas in Gaza had people imagining a better future.
It's going to be cheaper than the electricity they buy from Israel. It'll be cheaper from what they get from Egypt. And it would make sense.
But today, getting energy in Gaza is as uncertain as ever. And put on your cozy sweater, we're making Danish porridge.
Sushi rice or risotto rice. And then extremely important, salt. Salt. Remember salt, guys.
Today, here on The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Carolyn Beeler's away. It is good to have you here. European leaders have been locked in talks in Brussels all day over how to fund future support for Ukraine. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk put it starkly when he arrived at the meeting this morning.
Now we have a simple choice. Either money today or blood tomorrow.
Money today or blood tomorrow.
I am not talking about Ukraine only. I am talking about Europe. I think all European leaders have to finally rise to this occasion.
This summit could be crucial for Ukraine nearly 4 years after Russia's full-scale invasion. It's also a test of Europe's unity and strength on the issue. We begin today's show with the World's Europe correspondent, Orla Barry. So you've been closely following these talks, Orla. How tense have these conversations about funding support for Ukraine actually gotten?
Pretty tense, and they've been going on for weeks now. Usually when we've summits like this, Marco, a deal is almost certainly in the bag, and it's an opportunity for leaders to sign off publicly on an agreement and have a photo op together. That's not what's been happening today. And just to show how significant it is for Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, attended the meeting this afternoon. There's been lots of bilateral meetings happening on the sidelines because some countries, Belgium in particular, is very nervous about what's being proposed.
Yeah, so the main sticking point at today's summit is the use of frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. Explain that.
So you need to go back to the start of the war back in 2022. You might remember the EU froze Russian state assets which were being held in Europe. Around $246 billion of Russian state assets were being held in various financial depositories across Europe. Most of the money was being held in Belgium in a company called by a company called Euroclear. And under the plan being discussed today is whether the EU could loan some of that money to Kyiv, and then Ukraine will be expected to pay it back at the end of the war once Russia pays reparations for the devastation it's caused. Because we're nearly 4 years on and the EU is struggling to continue to fund Ukraine with the bloc's own budget, this seemed like a good solution, essentially using Russian taxpayer money rather than EU taxpayer money. The problem is that Belgium has been fiercely opposed to the plan.
And why is it so contentious?
Well, Belgium is afraid of what will happen if the money is given to Ukraine, that it'll be left exposed to legal and financial risks. It was insisting this afternoon, we understand that fellow EU countries give it ironclad guarantees that it will be protected from Russian retaliation. The Belgian Prime Minister, Bart de Wever, was speaking in his own parliament this morning, and he said if everything was nailed down and shared by the rest of the EU, then we'll jump into the abyss together with the rest of the Europeans and hope the parachute holds us. EU leaders have reportedly been trying to reassure him this afternoon that the EU will guarantee the loans to Ukraine. But I should say Russia, the Russian central bank, has already launched a lawsuit in Moscow against that Belgian company, against Euroclear, saying it's seeking billions in damages from them. So that shows why Belgium might be nervous. And the Belgian Prime Minister has already said some time back that Moscow has told us if we touch the money, we would feel the consequences until eternity. So he's certainly feeling the pressure.
Orla, you said these talks are significant for Ukraine. What exactly is on the line here for Ukraine?
Right now, Ukrainian officials have said that Kyiv has enough weapons, funds, and ammunition to continue fighting into the first half of next year. But beyond that, external support is crucial. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, predicts that Ukraine needs around $150 billion over the next 2 years to sustain its effort. And I spoke to Natalia Shapoval. She's in Kyiv a short time ago. She's head of the KSE Institute, one of the largest think tanks in Ukraine. And I asked her what would happen if a deal isn't reached today. And she said essentially it will play right into Russia's hands.
Without financial support, Ukraine cannot maintain the war against Russia. Not adopting the law, I think, is a bigger signal for Russia to scale up with all their efforts, because that's a sign of weakness, and all sign of weakness Russia reads all the time as, okay, we can do more.
Whenever Russia spies a weak spot, she said, they pounce, and EU leaders would do well to remember that today.
So if the proposal to use Russian assets does not get approved, what is the alternative? Is there one?
There is an alternative. Technically, EU member states could use funds in the EU's own budget as collateral for a loan for Ukraine. And this is a proposal that Belgium is in favour of. Most other countries would prefer the Russian assets option. But there is one country that will almost certainly oppose this idea, and that's Hungary. And this was Viktor Orban, the Hungarian leader, this morning as he headed into the summit.
The whole idea is a stupid one, to take away the money of somebody. There are two countries which are in war, yeah? And somebody, European Union, would like to take away the money of one of the warriors party and then to give it to another one. It's a marching into the war. So the Belgian Prime Minister is right. We should not do that.
And under that alternative proposal, all EU member states have a vote. If one country vetoes it, it falls through, and Hungary would almost certainly veto it.
Any response or reaction from Russia so far to all of this?
Well, Vladimir Putin has said that using the frozen assets to finance a loan would be akin to the theft of someone else's property. He had some choice words for Europe as well yesterday. He called European leaders subordinate little pigs who had followed the lead of the Biden administration, which he said had believed that Russia could be swiftly broken up and dismantled. The central bank, Russia's central bank, came out today and said that it would pursue damages against European banks for the illegal blocking and the use of its assets.
Orla, in the remaining 30 seconds, the relationship between the EU and the United States has been pretty rocky lately, to say the least. Do you see that having an impact on today's talks?
Yeah, and I should say President Trump is reported to be against the proposal to use the Russian assets. He said it would only prolong the war. There is a sense that if the EU doesn't reach a decision, that its own reputation will take a really bad hit. We've had EU leaders already being called weak by the US president. They'll be keen to show that they can come together, that they can be strong, they can stand up for Ukraine. And Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission president, said this morning she's prepared to stay for as long as it takes to get a deal.
Orla Barry is the World's Europe correspondent. Orla, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Marco.
We want to share with you now the story of Guan Heng. He's a 38-year-old man originally from central China. In August, he was detained by ICE agents in upstate New York. Depending on what happens next month in immigration court, Guan could be deported to Uganda. But human rights advocates say Guan's case is a textbook example of why the U.S. government came up with an asylum system in the first place. The World's Matthew Bell reports.
From his home in China, Guan Heng read foreign news reports about mass detentions and other human rights violations against Uyghurs in China's western region of Xinjiang. And in the year 2020, he decided to go see for himself. Guan is Han Chinese. They make up more than 90% of China's population. Uyghurs are a mostly Muslim, Turkic-speaking minority.
外国记者不能去，但是我可以啊。
Foreign journalists are not allowed to visit Xinjiang, Guan says to the camera in this 20-minute video, but I can. The video is on YouTube under the title In Search of Concentration Camps in Xinjiang. It's an impressive piece of citizen journalism. Guan used foreign news reports and satellite images to figure out where detention centers and military sites are located in Xinjiang. Then he drove there and shot videos of facilities that the Chinese government has said simply don't exist.
我再一次出现在了游客不应该出现的区域。山坡的另一边有一座新建
In
的
this scene, Guan climbs up a hill to get a clear view of what he describes as a newly built concentration camp. The place looks like a big high-security prison surrounded by tall walls, guard towers, and barbed wire fencing. Guan Heng knew that putting up a video like this in China would surely lead to his arrest, so he flew to Ecuador in 2021. Later, he got a flight to the Bahamas, and he bought a small inflatable boat there that he used to get to the shore of Florida. He applied for asylum in the United States as someone who would face certain punishment back home in China. While his case was pending, Guan got a work permit and drove a taxi to make ends meet. His video on YouTube got a lot of attention. Reyhan Assad is a Uyghur lawyer and human rights advocate born in Xinjiang. She's currently a PhD candidate at Harvard. Assad says that video helped corroborate reporting from foreign journalists about what's been happening to hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs.
What he saw is not just the newly built camps, but how they're also trying to expand the existing detention centers. And he was able to document that. So it also built on the evidence for the outside world to see, like, that this is a much larger campaign and even more terrifying than the world really know up to this point.
Assad says the fact that Guan is Han Chinese is important because the Uyghur community had largely concluded that most of the world, including Chinese people living abroad, are not particularly concerned about human rights in Xinjiang.
When the Uyghur community, diaspora activists, those in exile, everybody saw that, it also humanized the Chinese people who are silent in our eyes to say, like, there are conscientious people who really took the risks to do this kind of work to support the Uyghur advocates.
Reyhan Assad says some authoritarian governments stop going after their critics eventually, but that the Chinese government is relentless about pursuing people like Guan Heng. She says she has no doubt if he was ever to return to China, his life would never be the same.
So what could happen to him? At minimum, a life imprisonment, torture, and who knows, it could be even death penalty.
Assad points out that the Trump administration determined in 2021 that the Chinese government's treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang amounts to genocide. This was a decision that relied on the sort of reporting that Guan Heng took enormous risks to carry out. During an immigration court hearing on Monday, the Department of Homeland Security argued that Guan should be deported to Uganda because, the Trump administration says, it's a safe third country. But Sophie Richardson says the idea that he'd be out of China's reach there is not true. She's with a coalition of international NGOs called the Network of Chinese Human Rights Defenders.
It is hard to believe that Chinese authorities would not place serious pressure on Ugandan authorities to return him. It's a country in which Chinese corporate interests have a lot of sway. Beijing has demonstrated in many cases in recent years that when it is determined to have somebody returned to the country and prosecuted, it will do so.
所以在新疆这种外国媒体根本就进不去的地方，
At the end of Guan's video, he makes one final point, again speaking directly to the camera. In Xinjiang, where foreign media is not allowed, the Chinese government's persecution of Uyghurs is unimaginable, he says. May the Chinese Communist Party disband as soon as possible and put an end to all these crimes against humanity. For The World, I'm Matthew Bell.
More global news to come. You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. From the Great Lakes in the U.S. to the glacial meltwaters of Central Europe, quagga mussels have wreaked havoc on local ecosystems. Now the mollusks have been spotted for the first time in a new location, Northern Ireland. Stopping the invasive species from spreading is tricky, though. For expertise on that, we reach Bastian Eibenlinks, a microbial ecologist at the University of Geneva. Lake Geneva in Switzerland is inundated with quagga mussels, so unfortunately for them, they have a lot of expertise to share.
I guess we should say that they are problematic because there are so many of them. They are invasive, so they don't really belong in the lakes where we find them on both sides of the Atlantic. They come from Eastern Europe. They have found their way to Western Europe. They have found their way across the Atlantic to North America. And they are so prolific. They have such a high rate of reproduction that there are so many of them that they completely change ecosystems. They put them upside down.
How fast do they reproduce?
One female mussel produces millions of eggs every year, and there's hundreds of millions of them in a lake. So reproduction is massive. The thing is also that before we had the quagga mussel in Western Europe, like Lake Geneva, we had its cousin, the zebra mussel. And the zebra mussel basically reproduces one period in spring. The quagga mussels, they can do it all year round. And that makes a big difference, of course. And that's one reason that they're so competitive, that once they have a foot in the door in a lake, they basically drive out their cousins, the zebra mussels.
Wow. Well, as I said, reportedly, they've been spotted for the first time in Northern Ireland this week, but across the European continent, as you point out, they've been invasive for years. You've seen them transform Lake Geneva in Switzerland. What have been the impacts from the quagga mussels on some of the infrastructure that depends on lake water?
A lake like Lake Geneva, that is a deep lake. It's 309 meters deep. That means there's a lot of water. It's a deep water column. That means that, say, in the natural state, the life in the lake is dominated by life in this water column. The mussels, being benthic, mean they grow on the bottom of the lake on substrates, hard substrates. They take away all of the production of the lake and they transfer it from what was first life in the water column to life that is on the bottom. And that's a process we call benthification. And anything that is living traditionally, naturally in the water column is feeling the effects, meaning that there's just less energy, less nutrition for them. And therefore things like, in the end, fish that have been dominating the alpine lakes, the Swiss lakes for many years, we see them suffering.
Right. So the cycle of life is interrupted, ecologically speaking. How do quagga mussels impact infrastructure?
So, like I said, mussels, they need a substrate to attach to. They produce some threads that they use to attach themselves to a hard substrate, could be the lake bottom, but any hard substrate in the lake is a target for them. And that includes pipes that we use for cooling water. To give you one example, Lake Geneva, like I said, it's a deep lake, meaning there's a huge volume of cold water deep down in the lake. It's only the surface of the lake that warms up because of the sun. Most of the water is cold, meaning that you can use this. If you pipe that water through pipes to infrastructure, you can use it to cool the infrastructure without the need for air conditioning. So that's a smart idea, and that's being used increasingly. And pipes being a substrate for the mussels basically fill them up, and then cooling water is obstructed, and that is costing huge amounts of money to try to clean that up.
Yeah, so what are the solutions? What are the remedies?
So in terms of infrastructure, there are things you can do to clean. In terms of ecology, unfortunately, once you have the mussels in the lake, there's not so much really you can do. The best thing you can do is try to prevent mussels from getting to your lake. So, for instance, in Switzerland, we're now starting cleaning programs. When, for instance, people take a boat, a sailing boat or whatever, from one lake, they want to go to another lake, there will be, say, rules in place that they have to clean the boat, clean the hull at a cleaning station before they can move it to another lake, because that's been a major mechanism to move mussels from one lake to another.
Are you saying that the ecological life in Lake Geneva in particular will not recover from this?
I would be inclined to say life will be different. There's still life in Lake Geneva, there will be life, but I don't think it will be the same type of life, say the more natural state of the lake that we had before the invasion, before also the impact of climate change, because those things interact with each other. So yes, I do think we look at very long-term changes to the lake ecosystem.
So you said the quagga mussel came from Eastern Europe. I mean, do we know their exact origin, where they first came from?
We do. So they come from the Dnieper region in Ukraine. So that's where their native range is.
I mean, it's hard for me to imagine how they would get from Ukraine to Lake Geneva. I mean, folks in North America with the zebra mussel, also very invasive, may remember that they kind of got to North America by escaping bilge water from ships. So how did these mussels get to Lake Geneva?
I think very similar mechanisms. But yes, things like ballast water of ships or just mussels attached to a hull of a boat. We humans have so much transport. And that is like a superhighway for invasive species, because then as soon as you have that kind of a water connection between different river systems, species can just move about. So it's linked to human activities. That is what's spreading invasive species in general.
So I feel compelled to ask you, what is the situation with quagga mussels in North America?
The quaggas, they came together with the zebra mussels. If you look at maps, you can see that the zebra mussels typically were the first one to establish themselves, but then later at some point they're overtaken by the quaggas. And also if you now look at the Great Lakes, but also further down into further south, the quaggas are starting to dominate, in particular in Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, and so on. It's mainly quaggas, very similar to what we see in Europe. But what is an interesting lesson for us in Europe is that the quaggas have been dominating those lakes for more than 30 years in the US. So we can look towards long-term effects in the US lakes.
Yeah, so what lessons are you drawing, and how might they be applied to Switzerland or any other hotspot in Europe?
Well, when I say that this is going to be a long-term issue, that is also based on what we see in the US, that although they fluctuate, they're still very much present in the lakes. They also tend to move deeper over time and at depth, because conditions are colder and lower food, they grow slower, but they continue to expand, also in the Great Lakes in the US. And again, these are lessons that we take for our lakes. We have found quagga mussels down to 250 meters deep in Lake Geneva. But at that depth, they're not numerous and they're small. But we do think that over time, they will continue to expand, at least in mass, at those greater depths too.
Bastiaan Eibelings is a microbial ecologist at the University of Geneva, explaining the problem many places are facing, an infestation of quagga mussels. Coming up, the electric grid in Gaza is fragile. It doesn't need to be, though. That story is just ahead. You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced a $35 billion natural gas export deal with Egypt this week.
היום אישרתי את עסקת הגז הגדולה בתולדות ישראל.
In a recorded statement, Netanyahu said this is the biggest gas deal in Israel's history. He went on to explain that Israel will supply gas to Egypt and that it would be delivered by the U.S. company Chevron. The Israeli prime minister said the deal could strengthen Israel's status as an energy power in the region. It comes, of course, during a tenuous ceasefire in Gaza. Egypt has been instrumental in negotiations between Israel and Hamas to stop the fighting in the territory. Access to electricity in Gaza is not a new story, though. Israeli strikes on infrastructure, control over fuel, and precarious grid access in Gaza predate the current war. Reporter Zach Goldbaum chronicles that history in his podcast, Lawless Planet. For the next few minutes, we're going to hear what he found out.
Power has never come easily in Gaza. There are 3 unreliable transmission lines from Egypt, but really, most of it comes from 2 places. About half from 10 Israeli power lines, and then the rest, about 1/3 of the strip's electricity, comes from its only power station, the Gaza power plant.
This project is my life, actually, because I started with the development phase and worked with it for more than 30 years.
That's Dr. Rafiq Maliha, the plant's general manager. Dr. Maliha is a large man with a dark mustache, a PhD in mechanical engineering, and a singular mission: to keep the lights on in Gaza.
The location for the power plant is a very nice area with a lot of orange trees, olive trees. Sometimes I feel sorry that we have this power plant at that location, but the scarcity of land in Gaza is quite difficult.
This is the first independent power project for Palestinians. The Gaza power plant was born out of the 1993 Oslo Accords. Buried in the agreement was a call for cooperation in the fields of electricity and energy, as well as the establishment of an independent energy authority. Now, after 5 years of planning, Dr. Malia was there to watch the moment workers broke ground.
There was a lot of hope that the conflict could stop and cooperation could help everybody to live in dignity and prosperity.
But just a year after breaking ground, the project looked to be in jeopardy. First, there was a Palestinian uprising against Israeli rule known as the Second Intifada.
Everything was more difficult, more complicated, and the construction stopped because of the security situation.
Then there was a problem with the American energy giant that had signed a 20-year deal to invest in the power plant. That company? It was called Enron.
Guilty verdicts in the biggest case of corporate fraud in history.
It turned out that Enron was cooking the books and engaged in widespread financial fraud. They collapsed, dealing Dr. Malia's project yet another blow. Finally, in 2003, after 6 years of planning, 3 years of construction and tests, and $140 million, the Gaza power plant roared to life and began commercial operations.
And that really was a very great moment to Gaza and to us, of course.
The plant has 8 black smokestacks and turbines that run on industrial diesel, second only to coal for the amount of carbon it emits. But the plant was also designed to switch to natural gas if that resource ever became available. Then, barely 3 years after it was built, the militant Islamist movement, Hamas, rose to power in Gaza. In June 2006, they went to war with Israel. And in the early morning hours of June 28th, the Gaza power plant became one of the first casualties of the conflict. To save fuel for generators, garbage collection stopped. Toxic waste polluted the Gaza Strip, and the ensuing power cuts upended people's lives. That's a tailor in Gaza explaining to the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem how, in the wake of the 2006 strike, his whole neighborhood ran off a single generator. He explains how the power would switch on and off arbitrarily, which meant the tailor's wife struggled to make food for their family. If we are making bread, she says, sometimes it stops in the middle of baking. They couldn't refrigerate their food because the electricity was out for so much of the day, so they threw it away. Over the ensuing years, the Gaza power plant would continue to limp along, providing a fraction of Gaza's energy needs. The plant will be damaged again and again, and often shut down entirely due to fuel shortages.
To survive, you had to find a way or to go back. Instead of modern life, you had to go back 10 years or 20 years, 100 years so that you can manage.
But what makes this situation even more maddening is that only 19 miles off the Gaza coast sits an untapped energy resource that could power Gaza for years, and at one point might have changed its very future. It's September 27th, 2000, nearly a year after the groundbreaking ceremony for the Gaza power plant. On this day, Palestinian President Yasser Arafat is on a boat heading toward a huge British-owned drilling rig called the Gaza Marine.
Arafat was taken to where the rig was situated, where it drilled the well, say about 20-odd miles from the Gaza shore.
That's Michael Barron, who would later join British Gas Group, the company that operated the rig, as a political risk analyst. A week earlier, BG had lowered a diamond-tipped drill 1,900 feet into the water to explore for gas beneath the seafloor. It was the first project of its kind in Palestinian territorial waters, and it was successful. The reserves were estimated at 1 trillion cubic feet and would meet Palestine's energy demands for about a decade. There were even plans to export some gas to both Egypt and Israel.
There was a great deal of excitement and a buzz that Palestinians had their own natural resource, and turns out probably the largest and most valuable natural resource the Palestinians have.
On board the rig, Arafat says, "This is a gift from our God to our people, to our children, to our women, to our people inside and outside, to our refugees, and those who are living here on our land." Then he gives a signal to the crew to light the flare on the floating platform. Gas from the test well burns overhead.
Arafat made some very over-exaggerated claims that he'd turn Gaza into the next Singapore, but it would also be a secure, stable source of fuel for the Palestinian economy.
Not only that, but this would allow the Gaza power plant to run on natural gas, as it was designed to do. Palestinians could have energy and financial independence, and it would represent a seismic shift in the conflict. Israel, which had no fuel of its own and was boycotted by its oil-producing Arab neighbors, would benefit from the nearby energy too. It was a high-stakes partnership that would benefit everyone, but only if the two sides could work together. Then, on the very next day, the Second Intifada began. From 1987 to 1993, the First Intifada, which means uprising, had led to hundreds of deaths. The Second Intifada took a much darker turn. Palestinian suicide bombers targeting civilians became a more common occurrence inside Israel. The IDF responded, raining rockets down from helicopters on Palestinian villages. Roughly 1,000 Israelis and over 3,000 Palestinians were estimated to have been killed over the years of the Intifada.
There were those in the Israeli political system who said that the gas belonged to Israel, that previous Israeli government under Prime Minister Barak had gifted this to the Palestinians, but it was a gift that could be taken back when Israel wanted.
In 2001, just as the Gaza power plant is being completed, Ariel Sharon, who by now was Prime Minister of Israel, declared that Israel would never buy gas from Palestine.
Initially, his reaction was this is money for terrorists. And he opposed not just the Gaza Marine deal, but anything that helped the Palestinians. He was never going to do a deal with Arafat.
Over the next few years, two cases heard by the Israeli Supreme Court further undermined the project. First, after a group of Israeli and American companies sued to invalidate British Gas's license, the court ruled that neither Israel nor the Palestinians had sovereignty over the gas fields. They were, in effect, no man's waters. Then, another case in 2007 said the Israeli government also couldn't sell the gas that came from Gaza Marine.
And so any deal would have been worthless because the gas wouldn't have been able to enter the Israeli market.
On top of that, once Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip in 2007, Israel reduced Palestinian maritime access to just 6 nautical miles, down from 20 outlined in the Oslo Accords. So with Israeli naval vessels patrolling freely in Palestinian territorial waters, the natural gas fields were now off limits. In the wake of these setbacks, a project potentially worth billions of dollars was slipping out of reach. And just a few miles away, Israel was about to make a discovery of its own that would make Gaza's tenuous energy future even more stark.
Israel has made 2 large finds in the last 18 months. It's thought the fields may hold nearly 700 billion cubic meters of gas.
In 2009, an Israeli-American consortium of energy firms discovered a large natural gas deposit 80 kilometers off the coast of Israel. 2 years later, in December 2010, they discovered another gas field, and it was even bigger, the world's largest deep-water gas discovery in a decade. Together, the two fields are 30 times bigger than the Gaza Marine. It was a monumental change. Israel, which had always imported energy, was about to become a net exporter of gas, a regional energy power player.
What it should have meant was that Israel, therefore, no longer had any reason or interest in blocking Palestinian developing the Gaza Marine gas. Obviously, that did not happen. And I think that's because there is a long-standing overall Israeli policy to control Palestinian affairs.
But that is not what they were saying publicly in April 2011.
So we are announcing a series of steps intended to make Gaza independent of Israeli infrastructure by helping develop their electricity plants, water, sewage treatment.
That is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's standing at a press conference with former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. At the time, Blair ran the Office of the Quartet, a group composed of the UN, EU, US, and Russia, with the mandate of furthering peace and economic initiatives for Palestinians.
I thank the Prime Minister for his personal involvement in and support for these measures. The most important is a long-standing request of the Palestinian Authority for an agreement to revive discussions on the vital project of Gaza Marine gas field.
But these were empty promises. British Gas had lost interest in the project, and with no commercial partners, Gaza Marine was dead in the water. So the office of the quartet focused their attention on getting gas to Gaza a different way.
The Gas for Gaza is a project to bring natural gas from the Israeli natural gas network to the Gaza Strip.
That's Ariel Ezrahi, who in 2015 was Tony Blair's energy advisor at the quartet. He'd been approached by Blair to come up with a plan that would generate energy cooperation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. But as he began talking to both sides, it was clear the Palestinians were skeptical. That's because Ariel is Israeli-American.
We showed them that the gas was going to be the cheapest form of electricity for them to generate. It's going to be cheaper than the electricity they buy from Israel. It'll be cheaper from what they get from Egypt. And it would make sense.
For the Palestinian Authority, it raised a difficult question. Was deepening their dependence on Israel worth the trade for more reliable energy?
The Palestinian side said, look, if the Israelis agree to do this project, then we will also agree.
With a soft yes from the Palestinian Authority, Ariel turned his attention to convincing the Israelis.
And they came back with an answer after some weeks, and they said, look, we'll come as observers and not as full members. And I said, frankly, you can come as my mother-in-law, but just please show up in the room and let's talk and get this thing sorted.
Ariel organized a task force, and one of the first people to get involved was Dr. Rafik Maliha.
You felt that the power plant was really his baby. He was really concerned about things getting done fast enough.
As the Gas for Gaza project dragged on, Ariel's team had to navigate a political minefield between not only the Israelis, but different factions within Palestinian leadership.
There have always been very, very complicated relations because Hamas is in control of the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian Authority, PLO, is controlling the West Bank.
But something else was happening behind closed doors. A strategy of deliberately undermining the Palestinian Authority, Israel's partners in the Gas for Gaza project.
We know also now it wasn't just projects, but the Netanyahu government had a policy of suitcases of cash, etc., going into the Gaza Strip. And it's clear that he did this for his own political reasons. He wanted to divide and conquer. He wanted to undermine the prominence of the Palestinian Authority. So he thought that by strengthening Gaza and Hamas, that would be a way to do it.
With momentum on their side and the threat of Hamas contained, the gas pipeline was about to get the boost it needed.
The Netherlands has agreed to help build a pipeline to provide gas and water to Gaza.
It's September 2016, and Benjamin Netanyahu is in the Netherlands, standing next to Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte.
Mark, I want to express my appreciation for your willingness to help us advance peace with our Palestinian neighbors.
The two share platitudes, but there's little said at the press conference about how the project would advance peace. In the end, the press conference marks the beginning of a new phase for the pipeline. Feasibility studies, environmental assessments, additional funding, some coming from Qatar, some from the EU. And by the time the project was in its implementation stage, Ariel Ezrahi was ready to move on.
So spring 2022. At this point, I also felt like I had done my mission because the project had reached the stage that you could get to shovels in the ground, and I was ecstatic.
Then, just a year later, on October 7th, 2023, everything would change yet again. In March of last year, Dr. Rafik Maliha left Gaza and became a refugee in Cairo. Today, almost no fuel enters Gaza. The power lines remain severed, save for one that has intermittently powered a single desalination plant, and the Gaza power plant is still dormant. Once a symbol of Gaza's hopes and dreams, it is now a symbol of powerlessness. The same is true of the Gaza Marine and the Gas for Gaza project.
To be able to do such projects, even through intermediaries, when Hamas was controlling the Gaza Strip, and when Israel also had no real long-term vision for the resolution of the conflict, just doesn't work, doesn't fly.
Since this latest war began, the Israeli Energy Ministry has granted 12 licenses to 6 companies to explore for natural gas off the country's Mediterranean coast. The area being explored is in disputed waters, and Palestinians argue that it belongs to them.
That was Zach Goldbaum of Lawless Planet. You can hear the whole episode by searching for Lawless Planet wherever you listen to podcasts, or follow the link to it from our website, theworld.org. 11 members of the Nigerian Air Force were released from detention yesterday in the West African nation of Burkina Faso, more than a week after their aircraft made an emergency landing there. A Nigerian delegation had to negotiate with Burkina Faso's military junta to get the crew released. They had been flying to Portugal for aircraft maintenance before their forced landing at a time of heightened tension between neighboring countries in West Africa. A rift has been growing between countries in the Sahel that have had military coups in recent years, like Burkina Faso, and countries like Nigeria that are part of the Economic Cooperation Bloc known as ECOWAS. The plane and its personnel are now planning to continue their route to Portugal. Bamako, the capital of Mali, is still reeling from a blockade on fuel. An al-Qaeda-affiliated terrorist group known as Jnim choked off the city's access to fuel in September. Now, as Jnim retreats and Malian soldiers re-secure some routes into the city, the blockade is loosening. But as we hear from the World's Jerry Haddon, the group still poses a threat across the country.
The September fuel blockade shut down schools, businesses, public transportation, and it created miles-long lines at gas pumps across Bamako. Those lines are largely gone as Mali's military has moved into open roads. In a sign of some normalcy returning, Malians held a traditional festival a couple of weeks ago with a parade of drummers, dancers, and giant puppets.
Actuellement, c'est le moment difficile, mais nous, les artistes, on laisse pas.
These are tough times, one puppet maker told the Associated Press, but we artists won't abandon our traditions. We'll go on, he said, showing the world that we still exist. That existence remains in a sort of limbo. Jnim forces may have retreated from the main roads into Bamako, but they haven't gone away. Beatriz de Leon Cobo is a researcher on extremism and security in the Sahel, a region of savanna and desert in northern Africa. She says Jnim's fuel blockade served its purpose to show just how vulnerable Mali's military government is.
I think they proved their point, and once they saw that the Malian armed forces were coming with everything they had, they rather prefer going back to some of the other strategies, which are recruitment, which are being hostile to the population and ensuring that the population pledge allegiance to them.
Jnim's got time, she says, to regroup and to refill its coffers. Sergio Altuna agrees. He's an expert on the Sahel with the program on extremism at George Washington University. Altuna says Jnim has several ways of funding its terrorist operation, among them
taxing drug smuggling networks or other kind of illegal smuggling networks in the region, definitely kidnapping, and possibly financial help coming from international elements supporting Islamist projects worldwide.
That said, Jnim is facing challenges from competing terrorist groups in the Sahel, and it may have suffered a blow to its reputation during the fuel blockade of Bamako. Beatriz de Leon Cobo says any jihadist hope of inspiring a popular revolt there against the military junta seems to have backfired.
Lots of people have empathized much more with the security forces because for the first time ever, the people sitting in Bamako saw the threat very close and saw the impact of the threat.
Bamako is in Mali's south. Regions to the north are already mostly under Jnim's control. The army regularly attacks jihadist positions with the help of a Russia-backed paramilitary group called the Africa Corps, and this alliance is controversial. A recent Associated Press investigation suggests those forces have been carrying out random assassinations in remote villages, beheading men, and raping women. In a refugee camp just across the Malian border in Mauritania, a healthcare worker for Doctors Without Borders told the AP she suspects recent arrivals are victims of such abuse.
Mais seulement les gens ne demandent pas tout de suite les soins.
But new arrivals don't seek medical care, said Bessabe Alije, unless things get very bad, like the case we had today. Normally, victims prefer to keep their abuse a secret. The case Alije was referring to was that of a 14-year-old Malian girl who had arrived in critical condition. Her mother said she'd been raped by Russian soldiers. Her wounds had become infected. Doctors were able to save her. Human rights violations are common in this conflict, which now dates back more than a decade. Jnim fighters, Russian mercenaries, Malian forces all prey on civilians trapped in the crossfire. In one notorious incident from 2023, the United Nations accused Russian fighters and Malian troops of sexually assaulting at least 58 women and girls in a single village and killing hundreds of others. Soon after, Mali's military government expelled the UN peacekeeping mission. For The World, I'm Jerry Haddon.
With the northern hemisphere in the cold, dark days of winter, the time is perfect for a cup of soup. The world's Joshua Coe reports from a restaurant in Copenhagen that could not be more Danish if it tried.
The Danish word for porridge is hard for me to say, but it's not hard for Lasse Andersen.
Grød.
In case you missed it, that was...
Grød.
It's not just the word for porridge, it's the name of Andersen's chain of porridge bars. The sweater-clad Dane calls himself possibly the world's biggest porridge nerd.
Grød can be extremely versatile and extremely delicious.
Andersen is getting ready to make a quintessential Christmas porridge. Risengrød is a special holiday dish with a lot of history. It goes back about 200 years. And as tradition has it, at Christmas time, you are supposed to share it.
Every Christmas we celebrated at my grandpa and grandmom's house, which was kind of a farmhouse in the dark part of Jutland, Denmark. We had this tradition to also bring out a bowl of risengrød to the elves.
That's right, elves or nisse.
Back in the days, hundreds of years ago, if you wanted to have a good harvest, for instance, then you also had to sacrifice a meal for the elves. I think in many ways there are some good learnings from sacrificing stuff.
Risengrød is a rice porridge. Most grøds are made of grains that have long been grown in Northern Europe. Oats, rye, but not rice. Rice was once a luxury here, and it's what Andersen reaches for when we start cooking today. He uses a special porridge rice, but if you don't have it, don't worry, you got options.
Then sushi rice or risotto rice. I've made many risengrød on risotto rice.
He's heating a big pot of rice mixed with milk. Andersen uses a combination of rice milk and oat milk.
And then extremely important, salt. Salt. Remember salt, guys.
After about 10 minutes, this white liquidy concoction is gurgling away on the stovetop. Andersen lets this mixture simmer until it becomes thick and creamy. Now for the toppings.
So in Denmark, we usually eat it with cinnamon sugar and butter. That's it.
But Andersen puts his own twist on it. He says his custom topping is especially elvish.
So we have fresh tarragon in the blender, and now we are just adding normal white sugar. Yeah, I call it elf sugar. Green elf sugar.
Green elf sugar, okay. And finally, Andersen checks the pot.
So I guess the risengrød is ready to serve now, so shouldn't we try it?
I think we should try it. Let's go. Oh, it's just a mouthful of sugary warmth. It's delicious. For the world, I'm Joshua Coe in Copenhagen.
Josh Coe there with a fun story from our wintry archives. To close the show today, the solstice is only 3 days away. Keep your chin up, people. The World is a co-production of GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. I'm Marco Werman. Thank you so much for listening.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. macfound.org. And by FJC, a foundation of philanthropic funds serving the nonprofit sector with donor-advised funds, fiscal sponsorship, bridge lending, and more. FJC.org. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX. More information at theworld.org.